Hello and welcome to our webinar on the UK visa routes for doing business and investing in the UK. My name is Liz Timmins. I'm a solicitor specialising in immigration and employment law at Clarkslegal.
And I'm Carla Whalen. I also specialise in UK immigration and employment law. For anyone not familiar with Clarkslegal, we're specialists in UK immigration and employment. We also specialise in dispute resolution, corporate and commercial, real estate and private client work. We act for businesses, individuals and public sector, and we're a founding member of TAG Law, an international network of law firms. This webinar is being streamed live today, 10th of July 2015, and you can post any questions you have as we go along. It's also being recorded for anyone who can't listen live, so hello and thank you if you've downloaded this. There are some slides which accompany the webinar.
Before we talk about the visa routes that are available in the UK, we just wanted to discuss why people might want to invest and do business in the UK. So as you can see from this quote from the Prime Minister David Cameron, the UK is keen to promote inward investment. The report that this quote comes from, which was published by UK Trade and Investment, cites some key factors that attract investors to the UK. So as well as the strong economy, low corporation tax and highly skilled workforce that the UK has, the report also cites the stability and transparency of our political and legal framework as making it an attractive place to do business. One element of this is the visas that we offer to enable investors and entrepreneurs to do business here. So with this in mind, in this webinar we'll cover the key UK visas which can allow you to do business in the UK. So that includes making short visits to the UK, investing in the UK, setting up a business here, setting up a UK branch or subsidiary of an overseas business that exists outside of the UK, and also the routes to settlement and citizenship.
We're following a question and answer format in today's webinar, and the scenarios that we'll be discussing cover 4 situations, each suited to a different type of visa. And we've found that these are the visas that people who want to come to the UK to do business are most interested in. As I said before, you can type in questions as we go, and there'll be time for us to answer some of those questions at the end of the webinar.
So we're firstly going to talk about the visit visa. So the scenario that we have here is I have a client who is Egyptian, and he runs a successful pharmaceutical business in Egypt. He's thinking about setting up a UK subsidiary company and wants to visit the UK for a few weeks to meet potential business partners and suppliers. So Carla, what visa will he need to do this?
I would suggest using the visit visa. This replaced the old business visitor visa. There are different types of visit visa, but the most common and the one that would be of use to your client is the visit standard visa. This is the visa that's actually used by tourists and people visiting family, but it can also be used to carry out the kinds of business activity that your client's looking to do, so making contacts, meeting suppliers, that sort of thing. It's usually granted for 6 months, although there are some limited exceptions. You'll see on the slide that the timing of an application for a visit visa depends on whether someone's classed as a visa national or a non-visa national. So because your client's an Egyptian citizen, he's considered a visa national because Egypt is one of the number of countries and territories on the visa national list, which can be found in the immigration rules published by the Home Office. The visa nationals have to get a visit visa before arriving in the UK. If you're a visit visa national and you come to the UK without a visit visa, you'll be refused leave to enter. Anyone who's not on the visa national list can apply for leave to enter as a visitor on arrival at the UK border, although there isn't anything to stop them from applying for a visit visa in advance. So you can apply for a visa up to 3 months before the date of travel to the UK, and you should get a decision within 3 weeks. So looking at the visa entry requirements for the visit visa, first of all, you need to leave the UK at the end of your visit. This isn't a visa that offers a route to settlement. Also, you're able to support yourself for the duration of the trip, so your client will need to show that he has funds to cover reasonable costs during his visit. This will usually mean supplying documents such as bank statements or payslips for the last 6 months. You'll also be able to show that you can pay for your return or onward journey and for any other costs relating to your visit. Finally, you need to show that any business or other activities that you want to do in the UK are allowed by the visitor rules. So those rules say that you can't work or study while in the UK on a visit visa. The work includes establishing a business or running a business as a self-employed person. It also includes providing short-term cover for a role in a UK business. If your client's already paid and employed outside the UK, he must remain so while here on a visit visa. He can carry out permitted business activities such as attending meetings or conferences, negotiating deals and contracts, carrying out site visits and inspections, or attending trade fairs. There is an option for getting a longer-term visit visa. As I said, usually it's only valid for 6 months, but you can get one if you have a frequent and ongoing need to come to the UK. So these can be granted for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years. And you'll be allowed to come for 6-month visits during that period. You have to show that you have a frequent and ongoing need to come to the UK. Secondly, that the reason why you need to come to the UK is unlikely to change while that visit visa is valid. And that you plan to leave the UK at the end of each visit, as I say, each visit being for a maximum of 6 months. Within the period that the visit visa is valid, you can enter and leave the UK multiple times. However, you can't live in the UK through frequent successive visits on a visit visa. Okay, so it's a good visa for people coming to the UK to meet business contacts and suppliers, but it's not a long-term solution and it doesn't lead to settlement. So let's turn next to a scenario where an investor visa might be suitable. I've had a query from a client about her niece who's Chinese and spent a few years at school in the UK. She's 22 and she'd like to return to live in the UK. She doesn't have a job, but she recently inherited a large sum of money and is interested in an investor visa. Okay, so the investor visa is a good option for your client's niece, as under this route, she doesn't need a job lined up in the UK in advance, and she can do any work in the UK. She also doesn't need to demonstrate English language ability or provide evidence of being able to maintain herself here. The key requirement, though, is that she must have £2 million of funds to invest in the UK. These funds must be wholly under her control. They must be held in a regulated financial institution, either in the UK or overseas, and they must be disposable in the UK, i.e. free to spend here. She'll need to provide bank statements or a letter from her bank confirming this. She's only recently inherited the money. Is that going to be a problem? No, but if she hasn't held the funds for 3 months, then she'll need to evidence the source of the funds. As she's inherited the funds, she'll need to provide a notarized copy of this, of the will, I should say, and a letter from a Chinese legal advisor, presuming that the will was made in China. So the other requirements are that she must be 18 or over, and she must also have opened a UK bank account for the purposes of investing at least £2 million in the UK, and she'll need to provide a letter from her bank confirming this. Does she want to live in the UK with any family? Yes, I think she wants her boyfriend to move here too. So with this kind of visa, you can bring a spouse or an unmarried partner or children to live in the UK with you, and they need to apply for a dependent visa. So she can bring an unmarried partner, provided that she's lived with her partner in a relationship similar to marriage for at least 2 years before she applies, and she can evidence this. It's worth noting that they must intend to live with each other throughout their stay in the UK too. So an investor visa will be granted for up to 3 years, 4 months, and you can renew it for a further 2 years. It's worth bearing in mind that the rules on the level of investment changed on the 6th of November 2014. So for anyone who applied for an investor visa from the 6th of November 2014, who wants to extend their visa, they must have invested at least £2 million in the UK. This must have been invested in either UK government bonds or share capital or loan capital in active and trading UK registered companies. Just to note, there are some investments which are excluded, such as investments in companies engaged in property investment, management or development, so she'll need to check this.
People who want to renew investor visas which were granted before the 6th of November 2014 need to have invested less than this, as the rules have changed since then. So for your client's niece to extend her visa, she'll need to invest at least £2 million within 3 months of the date she enters the UK. Alternatively, she can have made the investment up to 12 months before she applies for her visa. But either way, the £2 million investment must be maintained for the whole period.
Well, she hasn't actually already invested anything in the UK.
Okay, so if she applies now, she'll need to keep evidence of the date she arrives in the UK, such as her flight ticket. She'll also need to provide a series of investment reports from a UK regulated financial institution which confirms the destination and date of the investments that she makes, as well as various other details. So turning to settlement then, there's no requirement to spend a certain amount of time in the UK when you're here on an investor visa, so you are free to travel as much as you need. However, if you want to ultimately apply for settlement, or indefinite leave to remain, and British citizenship, then you need to bear in mind that there are rules on the amount of time you can spend outside of the UK in order to qualify for this. So to qualify for settlement, you must have lived in the UK for 5 years and not have spent more than 180 days outside of the UK each year. You also need to have passed the Life in the UK test and evidence your knowledge of English. So this is either by being from an English-speaking country, having passed an English language test, or having a degree taught in English. If you've been here for 5 years on an investor visa, you also need to show that you have maintained your investment of £2 million throughout the whole period. Now for the investor visa, there is an option to accelerate the route to settlement. So you can apply for settlement after 2 years if you have at least £10 million of your own under your own control in the UK. Alternatively, you can apply for settlement after 3 years if you have at least £5 million of your own under your own control in the UK. So just to briefly cover applying for citizenship, to apply for this, which is also known as naturalisation, you must have lived in the UK for 5 years, and you must have been free from immigration restrictions for 12 months before you apply. So this means that you can apply 12 months after you've been granted indefinite leave to remain. Therefore, if you apply for settlement after living here for 5 years, then you can apply for citizenship 1 year later. If you apply for settlement earlier than this, under the accelerated route, then you can apply for citizenship after you've lived in the UK for 5 years in total. Either way, you must not have had more than 450 days outside the UK in the 5 years before you apply, and you can't have spent more than 90 days outside the UK in the 12 months before you apply.
Okay, this sounds like it could be an option, but I think it will depend on the level of funds that she has to invest.
Yes, that's absolutely the key requirement here. So the next visa that we're going to talk about is the entrepreneur visa, which also requires applicants to demonstrate a minimum level of funds. So the scenario here is I have a client who is South African and wants to set up a retail business in the UK. He's got some financial backing and wants to know whether he can apply for an entrepreneur visa to enable him to do this.
Okay, yes, I think an entrepreneur visa could be a good option. In terms of the purpose of the entrepreneur visa, it's for people who want to set up a new business or take over the running of a business in the UK and work for the business in a self-employed capacity. You can come to the UK with an entrepreneur visa for a maximum of 3 years and 4 months. Is your client outside the UK?
Yes, he lives in South Africa.
Okay, because you can switch on to an entrepreneur visa from inside the UK in certain circumstances, but the requirements then are slightly different. So the requirements for your client would first to be to satisfy the genuine entrepreneur test. That means that he needs to demonstrate that he genuinely intends to establish, take over, or become a director of a business in the UK within the next 6 months, and that he doesn't intend to take any employment in the UK other than working in his business. He must show that he has at least £200,000 of his own money available to invest, and that he genuinely intends to invest the money in the business. I should say there is a lower financial requirement if you have funding from certain sources, such as a venture capital firm that's regulated by the FCA or from the UK government departments. In those circumstances, funding of £50,000 will be sufficient, but I think for most applicants this is unlikely to be the case, so for most people we'll have to have at least £200,000 available to invest.
So what do you mean by available?
Well, you mean the money is either in your client's own possession, or it's in the financial accounts of the UK business of which he's a director, or it's available from a third party, in which case the third party must be named in the application. The money can be shared by a team of up to 2 entrepreneurs, and that means that each team member can apply to come to the UK on an entrepreneur visa using the same investment funds. However, both members of the team must still satisfy all of the entry requirements. You can also apply for an entrepreneur visa if you've already invested funds in a UK business in the past 12 months before you apply. So you can either have invested the full £200,000, or if only part of the investment has already been made in the past 12 months. You can rely on this, but you must then be able to show that you have access to the remaining balance.
So I don't think he's invested anything yet.
Okay, in that case he'll need to show that he has £200,000 in a regulated financial institution. So for funds held in the UK, that's the FCA and the PRA. And he must also show that it's available for investment and it's freely transferable to the UK. And there are requirements for how to prove this, depending on where the funds are held. At the bottom of the slide there, you see that when applying for his visa, the client will also need to will need to provide a business plan that sets out his proposed business activities in the UK and how he expects the business to succeed. He'll also need to meet the English language requirement, and actually South Africa isn't on the list of countries that are exempt from the English language requirement, so he will have to prove his knowledge of English by either passing an approved test or by having a degree-level qualification that was taught in English. Finally, again, he needs to show he can support himself for the entire duration of his stay, and because he's outside the UK, that means he needs to have at least £3,310 in personal savings at the date of the application.
I think he's got a young family. Can he bring them with him?
Yep, as with the investor visa, an entrepreneur visa means that he can apply for dependent visas to bring children or a spouse or an unmarried partner to live in the UK too. So as I said earlier, this visa gives leave to remain for 3 years and 4 months, and you can apply to extend an entrepreneur visa for another 2 years. To extend, you must show that you've invested the £200,000 in a UK business and that you intend to continue operating the business or businesses. You must have also registered with HMRC as self-employed or with Companies House as a director within 6 months of entering the UK, and you must still be registered in the 3 months before you apply. And finally, you need to have established a new business that's created the equivalent of 2 full-time jobs for settled people in the UK.
So his business needs to create 2 full-time jobs within the first 3 years and 4 months. Is it any different if he's taking over an existing business?
Well, no, where you've taken over an existing business, you have to show that your services or your investment have resulted in the net creation of equivalent to full-time positions. So when it comes to applying to extend the entrepreneur visa, you again have to show that you have funds to maintain and accommodate yourself and any dependents. As with the investor visa, an entrepreneur visa can allow you to apply for settlement after you've lived in the UK on the visa for 5 years and provided you haven't spent more than 180 days outside the UK each year. The requirements for settlement are the same as for extending leave to remain, so you have to be registered with HMRC as self-employed or with Companies House as a director of a new or existing business. Like with the investor visa, there are accelerated routes to settlement, meaning you can apply for settlement after 3 years in the UK if the number of full-time jobs that have been created is at least 10, or the business has an income of at least £5 million during the 3-year period. And then finally, you can also apply for citizenship once you've lived in the UK for 5 years and you've been free of immigration restrictions for 12 months. So assuming you apply for settlement after the 5 years, you can apply for citizenship after being in the UK for 6 years in total. Again, if you apply for settlement after 3 years under the accelerated route, you can apply for citizenship after being in the UK for a total of 5 years.
Okay, great. So he's got some financial backing, so the entrepreneur visa could definitely be an option for him.
I do just want to flag at this point that there is, it's possible to apply for a graduate entrepreneur visa. In that case, you need to be a graduate from outside the EEA, and you must have been officially endorsed as having a genuine and credible business idea. The endorsement will be by the UK university where you got your degree, or it can be under the Sirius programme, which is run by UK Trade and Investment. On this kind of visa, you can only stay in the UK for a maximum of 2 years, and you can't apply to settle under this route. But you can switch from a graduate entrepreneur visa into another visa category that could lead to settlement, such as entrepreneur or a Tier 2 general visa if you meet those requirements.
Okay, so moving on to the last of our 4 scenarios then.
Okay, I have a client that's a successful publishing company currently operating exclusively in the US. They're interested in setting up in the UK, and they've already registered a branch at Companies House and looked into renting some offices. They want to send a senior manager from the US company to manage the new UK company. Is there a visa that will enable them to do this?
Yes, so the representative of an overseas business visa might be a good option here. So this visa allows companies which operate outside of the UK and don't have a UK presence to send an employee to the UK to set up and run a UK branch or subsidiary. A key difference between this visa and the entrepreneur visa is that the visa applicant must be a senior employee of a business which operates outside of the UK, and they can't be a majority shareholder of that business. So the first question I'd be asking your client is whether the senior manager that they want to send is a majority shareholder of the company. If he is, then they might need to apply for another visa, such as an entrepreneur visa. In addition, the company can't already have any branch, subsidiary or representative in the UK.
Does it matter that the overseas company's already registered the UK branch at Companies House?
No, that's permitted as long as the UK branch hasn't transacted any business yet. So in addition to this, there are a number of requirements that the senior employee who is applying for this visa must satisfy. So firstly, he must be employed outside the UK by a business which has its headquarters and principal place of business outside of the UK. He must also have full authority to take operational decisions on behalf of the overseas company in order to establish and run the UK branch or subsidiary. And the UK branch or subsidiary must carry out the same type of business activity as the overseas company. He must intend to be employed full-time as the sole representative of the overseas company, and he can't work for any other employer in the UK. He also has to meet the usual English language requirement. So in this case, if he's a US national, then that will satisfy that requirement. Finally, he has to show that he can maintain and accommodate himself and any dependents without recourse to public funds.
I think he is engaged to be married. Is he able to bring family then with him on this kind of visa?
Yes, he can bring his family with him, and they apply for dependent visas in the same way. So the visa will be granted for 3 years and can be extended by 2 years if he's still working for the same company. After 5 years, he and his family can apply for settlement if he is still working for the company and he can show that he's established a UK registered branch that is actively trading. The usual rules on time outside of the UK apply.
Okay, so that covers all 4 of the visas. And we've had, first of all, the visit visa. That one's usually valid for 6 months, and it's useful for people wanting to develop business contacts or to scope out opportunities. You can't work while in the UK, and it isn't a route to settlement.
We've also discussed the investor visa, which is available to those with at least £2 million of available funds to invest in the UK. So that's granted for up to 5 years in total and can lead to settlement or citizenship.
I discussed the entrepreneur visa, which is available if you have £200,000 of funds and want to establish or take over the running of a UK company. Like the investor visa, it can be granted for up to 5 years in total and can lead to settlement and citizenship.
And finally, we had the representative of an overseas business visa. That's where you want to send a senior employee to set up a UK presence. And like the others, this can be granted for 5 years and can lead to settlement and citizenship.
Okay, so we have had a few questions coming in. and we do have a little bit of time to look at a few of those now. So we've had a question from someone from the US who's going to visit the UK and will be delivering talks to groups of business contacts in the UK while she's visiting. So will that fall foul of the visitor rules? Well, actually, it's fine to give talks or speeches to contacts and business contacts, etc., while you're in the UK on a visit visa. What the rules are very clear about is that you can't be paid for doing that kind of activity. So, for example, if she wants to come over and she's going to meet with some contacts, and maybe they're going to invite colleagues or their own contacts, and she's going to do a series of talks, that's okay in principle, as long as she's not getting paid for it. I mean, she is allowed to get expenses, reasonable expenses, subsistence, travel, that sort of thing, but she can't receive a fee for it. And also the organisation that's organising them can't make a profit as a result. Otherwise, I think that should be fine under a visit visa.
Okay. I've also had a question through from a gentleman in Dubai. He wants his family to move to the UK so that his daughter can go to school in the UK. Wants to know if an investor visa would work in this situation. Yes, so the answer to that is absolutely yes. Obviously, the key requirement is that you need to have £2 million available to invest in the UK. So he can apply for an investor visa if he's eligible, and then his wife and daughter can apply for dependent visas and come to the UK with him, and it can lead to settlement and potentially citizenship if that's what you're interested in. So that's all we've got time for today. I don't think we've got any more questions in, so that's all we've got time for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you do have any questions following on from this webinar, then feel free to email them in. Our contact details are going to come up on the next slide shortly. And we can certainly get back to you. Equally, if you want some more information on any sort of immigration advice in terms of coming to work in the UK or set up a business here or invest here, then feel free to get in touch and we'd be happy to help you. So that's everything from us. Thank you very much for listening in.